the idea of why a Jewish bride wears a veil. It's something that we take for granted, and I think we know the reason. And I say that because I thought I knew the reason. I thought I knew the reason, and I was surprised by what I found with the research. And there's also some very interesting ideas here behind the whole idea behind the bride's veil. So I thought we could look at that today. So the bride wears a veil for the chuppah, right? We know that the badekin ceremony, the covering ceremony, is when the groom comes in accompanied by his father and father-in-law, and a whole bunch of all the men come from the groom's room. They approach the bride. She's not covering her face at this point. She's been greeting her guests, and he takes the veil, which is on her headdress at some point, somewhere on her head, and covers her face. After which the father of the bride, as well as the future father-in-law of the bride, approaches to bless the bride, gives the bride a bracha, and maybe the grandfather, and then they sort of retreat. And the bride is covered with the veil for the rest of the chuppah ceremony, right? The next part of the Jewish wedding. So the question is why, and why do they do this? And some, by the way, why do they cover? And some of them some people have the custom. I don't know if you've ever heard this. I hadn't. Where the groom says a blessing to the bride. That is the bracha that Rivka's father and brother gave her as she was going off to meet her betrothed, Isaac, Yitzchak, which is basically, our sister, you should be the mother of thousands and 10,000s. That was the bracha that her mother...
Some brides go screaming.
Right. So I had never heard of that before, and I don't know who does that, but that is apparently a custom in some cases. So the question is, why do we cover the bride's face with a veil? So go ahead.
Well, I learned that one of the reasons for the badekin and the groom coming and seeing the bride and then placing the veil over is from Rachel and Leah. That he's getting the right, not getting a bait and switch.
Right. So we know the story of Yaakov and Rachel was that Yaakov was promised by Lavan to marry Rachel, his beloved, and Lavan tricked him, where he, instead of bringing in to the bridal chamber Rachel, they brought Leah, and her face was covered with a veil, and therefore Yaakov didn't know it was not his intended until the following morning, when he woke up and said, "Oh, I've been tricked." Yeah, what do you want to say?
What would make more sense? Because she stayed covered during the where she's greeting her guests, just keep her face covered, and then the groom comes in, and then he removes the veil.
Right.
Aha!
Right.
You are Rachel.
Right.
That would make more sense.
Right.
But once he's seen her, and he knows he's not getting tricked, he knows, why then?
Perfect question. That's exactly what I was going to say. Is that if it is the case that we want to make sure that the chassan is getting the right kala, so he should be uncovering her face with the veil. He should not be covering it, right? In fact, some rabbis say that this incident between Yaakov and Rachel and Leah is reason that the bride should not be covered with her face. Okay, so you're right, but if you're going to say, well, okay, he comes in, he sees the bride, and then he covers her face. The question is, why do we cover it at all? We still have that question there, right? So to answer the question, we have to discuss a little bit the two parts of the wedding ceremony. Now, by two parts, we know three parts: the badekin, the chuppah, and the meal. But when I say two parts, I'm talking about the two legal parts. According to Jewish law, we have two separate, distinct parts of the entire marriage ceremony. One is called the kiddushin, and the second one is called the nisuin. And they're both legally required. Kiddushin, well, they're Hebrew words, so it doesn't matter how you spell them in English. Okay. Or do you want to know the Hebrew spelling? No, you were asking about the nisuin. Nisuin. Nisuin.
Okay, close enough.
Close enough, okay. So, right, they're both required for the wedding. They both serve a specific function, legal function, okay? They actually used to be done. Today we do them in one go, right? We go to the wedding, we see the Kiddushin and the Nisuin. It used to be that actually these two separate parts of the wedding process were done separately, days, weeks, even months apart, where you had the Kiddushin, the betrothal, and then the Nisuin months later. Okay, now we do them together at the wedding.
What is Nisuin?
I'm about to explain. So the Kiddushin was the first part of the wedding. The Kiddushin comes from the word Kodesh, which is, we know that word to mean holy or sanctified. And it means that the bride is being set aside for the groom. Okay, set aside for the groom. So that's what happens. The bride is set aside for the groom. And once this part of the ceremony is done, they are wedded together. They would actually need a get in order to dissolve the union, but they're still not completely married at this point. Now, what actually happens during the Kiddushin part? Anyone want to take a guess?
The papers are signed?
No, actually, the papers are signed before. That's what the groom is doing in his room before the
Is the
Bajakin.
Kedusha where they break the plate?
That's the Tanayim.
Okay.
No, that's I was going to say that. Yeah, go ahead.
They're going online and picking out the gifts.
Right. The Kiddushin, where the groom says, I'll give you a hint. He says, you are now special for me. What is he doing? He's giving her a ring. So the giving of the ring is that first part of the ceremony where he's saying, and he actually says the word, Harei at mikudeshet li. You are now sanctified for me. Under the chuppah it happens, right. Okay, so that's the first part.
That's the whole the idea of it's questionable about giving a ring ahead of time, during engagement, to make sure it's not like a wedding ring.
Yes.
To accidentally be a Kiddushin.
Right. Yeah, because once you, go ahead.
But they used to give a ring at the Kiddushin when it was days.
It's always, that's always been the Kiddushin element of the marriage, giving a ring.
Weeks and months apart.
Yes, they would give the ring,
This would
beforehand.
be a wedding ring or an engagement ring?
Well, that's what Laurie was saying, that it has to be, the wedding, it's a wedding ring. The engagement ring is just sort of a promise ring, what people might call a promise ring. So that's a separate, the actual engagement part, the rabbis refer to that as coming before Kiddushin, what we know as engagement, right? An engagement.
They actually gave the wedding ring.
The wedding ring is the one that seals the
There's a
deal.
lot of rules about
Exactly. The band has to be a continuous piece of gold. It can't be two pieces welded together, for example. That's what I know about the wedding band. I don't know what other rules there are about
But
it.
that used to be given, that wedding band, months ahead or
Yes,
months ahead.
months ahead. But once that wedding band was given, they are officially joined together. Not yet completely married, but officially wedded together.
But today you don't do that.
Today we do it
combined.
under the chuppah. Everything happens under the
So
chuppah.
today, if you have a vort,
Right.
Is that what it's called, to celebrate the engagement? You can still, you don't need a get. in order to break
Correct.
that, because there's no ring.
Correct. There's no Kiddushin ceremony. The Kiddushin, again, the legal parts of the wedding ceremony are Kiddushin and Nisuin. Those two things today happen under the chuppah, really under the chuppah and beyond, which I'll get to in a minute. Okay, but yes, the engagement party and the engagement ring, the bracelet that the groom gives her during the engagement sometimes, none of that is a legally binding exchange. Sometimes she gives him something also, usually a watch, a gold watch or something like that. So none of that is legally binding in terms of halacha. It's only a nice engagement present. Okay?
Got it.
Okay. So that's Kiddushin. All right. The groom gives the bride the wedding ring. And as a matter of fact, at my weddings, that's officially when they're wedded. And that's really when you should say Mazel Tov. In fact, at my wedding, I remember turning to when he gave me the ring, I don't remember who it was, but we started saying Mazel Tov under the chuppah. because that's the moment you're married. You know, everyone waits for the glass to break because you have to do that part of it too. But that's the official thing. That's when you're married. You know. Okay, but that doesn't end it, right? That doesn't complete the marriage. There is, as I said, the second part of the marriage requirement, legal marriage requirement, is nisuin. Now, nisuin comes from the word elevation. It means a completion, a consummation, a legal consummation, not physical, not physical. Okay. Don't look at me like that.
Right under the hook.
No, right? It's a legal consummation of the marriage, okay? It's the decisive act that now allows the couple to have a new status as a couple. It's when they are, their marriage is officially, you know, it's complete, basically. The Talmud considers this stage, the nisuin, biblically required, and again, it's a legal consummation. Now, however, nisuin, there are a lot of different opinions as to how we accomplish nisuin. Okay, it's not exactly clear which one of the many ways to do it is the right way. So our custom is to actually do as many as we possibly can in order to fulfill all the requirements, to make sure that we know, okay, we now did it. So one of these possible acts of nisuin is chuppah. Now, I'm not referring to the whole marriage ceremony. I'm talking about a word, chuppah, which has a very legal term. It means covering, okay? So there is some ritual of covering the bride and groom together that is the definition of chuppah. So what does that mean? Now, this also has a very complicated legal purpose. It symbolizes the covering of the bride and groom together will symbolize his bringing her under his wings or under his aegis, you know, and his protection, bringing her into his domain, as it were, right? Because remember that the legal process of marriage is really an acquisition of the groom, that the groom is making of the bride, right? So to complete the process of the marriage, he has to bring her to him in some way, right? What the exact chuppah means today, we don't know, but there are several possibilities, several possible definitions of chuppah. One is that it means that it was the groom's home, right? And that entering his home, or if not his home, sometimes it was an addition onto his father's home that was set aside for the bride and groom, much like the Eliases did. So it's once she enters that house or that chamber, that is the official act of chuppah. Okay, that would legally consummate the marriage ceremony. Maimonides said that it was Yichud that did it. Now, you know what happens after the chuppah? I'm about to tell you what happens after the chuppah ceremony, when the bride and groom, they break the glass and then they leave the wedding hall. Okay. Everybody goes to wash, but the bride and groom go to a room in which they are supposed to be left alone because this is sort of this is the first time they're allowed to be left alone in a room with a closed door. And they usually have something to eat there. Nothing legal happens, but it's sort of the sealing of the deal, as it were. In other words, making it a legal consummation. So Maimonides, like I said, Rambam thinks that this act qualifies for what we call chuppah, the chuppah act of covering, right? The Torah said it could be that the groom covers the bride with a piece of clothing. So now we're getting close to the idea of the veil here. Another opinion holds that it's the very process of the bride leaving her father's home that she's intending now. She's not, once she leaves the home, she's no longer part of her father's house. That's chuppah. Another opinion is that apparently in the days of the Second Temple, they had a tradition was to have a very beautifully decorated coach carry the bride to the chassan's home. That could be it. And finally, we have the Tosafos said that the covering of the bride's face with the veil does this act of of chuppah, because that symbolizes him bringing her under his protection. And of course, this is why a lot of opinions hold that it's the groom that has to do the veiling, because it's his act of acquiring her and bringing her under his protection. Now, so because we don't know which of these acts is really the definitive act of chuppah, we try to do as many as possible. All right, so we do yichud, we do the veil, we do, she's eventually going to go into his home, she's leaving her father's on business, all of this stuff is done. Now, so the bride is veiled. The overhead canopy that we use today is also another form of, literally, chuppah. That's the covering of the bride and groom together. So that is also an element of them being together. There is also an Ashkenazic custom that I hadn't heard of, where the groom's talus is placed on both of their heads. So that would be another way of doing chuppah.
Do you need a box of toilets?
No, I'm fine, thanks. And this, as far as I understand, this custom was not kept by the Ashkenazim, only by the Germans and the Sephardim. And the chuppah, as we know today, where the four poles, the big chuppah, it has the earliest mention we see of it is in the 16th century with, I think, the Ramah. Okay, now, in the past, the veil had the force of law, and it was considered one of the things that they did to satisfy the chuppah requirement. But today, it doesn't have the force of law. It's not really a halachic thing. It's just a symbolic gesture that we do, that is a symbol of chuppah, so we do it today. So that's one of the reasons that we do that. It's not, there are some opinions that it does constitute nisuin, that it does satisfy the requirement for chuppah that is necessary. But as I said, which is why in many communities, the groom himself has to do it. But today, most agree that it's just a symbolic thing that we do. Okay, so now I want to talk about a couple of interesting sources from the Torah that we see of veiling in general, not just a bride. There's actually only one example of veiling a bride from the Torah. There's another example of another woman veiling herself in the Torah. And the third and final example we have of someone veiling themselves is actually not a woman at all. It's a man. So let's talk about these biblical sources because they're kind of interesting. The bride who veils herself, anybody? Rivka, yeah. You were going to say Rachel. I meant in the text rather than the Medrash. I'm talking about the actual text of the Torah, rather than the commentaries that tell us the behind the scenes, right? So Rebecca, right? She is traveling to, remember Eliezer, who was Abraham's servant, was sent to find a mate for Yitzchak. For Yitzchak, right. And so Eliezer brings Rivka back home, and she's on the camel, and she sees in the distance Yitzchak. She doesn't know who it is. So she asks Eliezer, and the pasuk says, and she said to the servant, "What man is this that walks in the fields to meet us?" And the servant said, "It is my master," meaning Yitzchak. And she took her veil and covered herself. So this is obviously the origin of the Badek, and this is the Torah source for this custom.
Was it like modesty that she was?
Right. Partly modesty, and I'm guessing it was also, I think, I don't know if the commentaries say this or not, but it was an act that was intended to be part of the wedding symbolic of her upcoming wedding. The fact that Rivka doesn't wear the veil on the trip at all and only veils herself in front of her groom may signify to the rabbis that this is why, again, the groom has to be the one to cover the bride's face. In other words, as we said before, he has to see her face, and then she covers. They cover the face. Now, I read a very fascinating commentary from the Netziv about what her veiling herself signified, and he says it's something her covering her face signified something about her own personality that actually had significance in terms of her relationship with her husband. He says that it was really an expression of her self-possession and her privacy, her individualism, that she had a core of individualism, that she was actually putting a separation between herself and Yitzchak, her future husband, that this kind of relationship was less open than the openness that was more characteristic of, say, Yaakov and Rachel, or Abraham and Sarah. They seem to have, the other couple seem to have more of a symbiotic, really close relationship. But Rivka and Yitzchak had this separation. And he says that the reason for this, that Hashem made it like this, is that so that she would be able to have the strength, the resolution, the individualism, whatever you want to call it, to make the decisions that she had to make in order to ensure that Yaakov received the blessing from his father instead of Esav. So let me remind you of the story. The rivalry between Yaakov and Esav, right? Yitzchak loved Esav best, we're told, and Rivka loved Yaakov best, right? So right there you see a little bit of a division. Yitzchak was tricked by Esav into believing that Esav was an upstanding man. He wasn't, but he tricked his father into thinking so. Yitzchak really thought that Esav was the true inheritor of the legacy of Abraham, that he was the one that was supposed to carry on the legacy of the Jewish people, to be the firstborn. He was the firstborn, and he was supposed to be the one that got Yitzchak's special bracha to the firstborn. And he was really fooled by Esav. Rivka, his wife, knew differently. She had a level of Ruach HaKodesh, of divine inspiration, and she knew that Yaakov was really the one. She knew that she had to in some way, change the situation, trick Yitzchak into giving the blessing to Yaakov. And that's why we have the whole story of how she convinced Yaakov to wear his brother's clothing, so that he would be, or the fur clothing that would show him to be hairy, because Yitzchak would touch the arm and feel it, because he was blind. Yitzchak was blind, so he would touch the arm and say, "Oh, it's Esav," and then he would give Yaakov the blessing that was intended for Esav, right? And Rivka knew this was the right thing to do. This was, according to all the commentaries, she did the right thing. She did the thing she had to do, but the Netziv says it's because she had this core of individualism that she was able to carry that out. Otherwise, she might have been swayed by her husband. She might have been too simpatico with him to be able to say, no, I have to do something different. So it's a fascinating thing. The veil is a matter of showing us her self-possession, which I thought was just an interesting thing. What this might, what this might tell us in terms of the bride is an interesting thing, right? Because we do have this connection to the bride. Right. So here he's saying it's exactly the opposite. It's not a significance of him, of him possessing her, right? But rather her possessing herself. It's so interesting. I thought that was very interesting. The second woman in the Torah to veil herself is Tamar. Tamar and Yehuda, that incident there. So again, very brief review here. Tamar is Yehuda's daughter-in-law. And the rabbis also have nothing but good to say about what she did. She also tricked Yehuda into having relations with her so that she could conceive by him, because she was trying to enact a levirate marriage. It's a whole side story, we won't get into it. But the point is that she had to trick Yehuda. And so she presented herself in the street as a prostitute. But in order that Yehuda wouldn't recognize her, she covered her face with a veil. And the rabbis also praise this tremendously and say this is an act of modesty on her part. And they say that because of this act of veiling herself, she was Zocha, she earned the reward of having kings and prophets descend from her. And they also say that, it's an interesting side note, someone notices that both Rivka and Tamar are the only women that veil themselves, and both Rivka and Tamar are the only two women in the Torah who have twins. So there's like some sort of positive thing here going on. We're going to talk about now, I'm going to get into the real reasons as that we know of for veiling them for veiling the bride. The third person that I'm going to come back to in a couple minutes. Yeah, go ahead. Question.
She did it for deception. She didn't do it for modesty.
Well, it's a little complicated because the rabbis say that she was actually veiled in her house as well. That Yehuda really didn't know her face. So in other words, she could have. Yeah. So it really was. It was. They praise her on this score, right? Not Rivka. Tamar. Did I say Rivka? That Tamar was. She had her face veiled in her home as well, so that Yehuda really wouldn't have known her face, but they do praise her for this. Yeah.
I just wonder what the customs were at that time, even among, the non-Jewish people in terms of veiling. Because, I mean, when you see pictures of some Middle Eastern peoples, I don't know, Bedouin or whatever,
Yeah.
the bride is also veiled. And then I was reading, I think it was taking place among Muslims in Egypt, and this family, they always covered their entire face with some kind of veil, whether they were married or not.
Right.
And I remember, well, one thing that struck me is that the women were talking in a courtyard, and they had taken their veils off, and one of the sons or brothers or nephews walks in and sees their faces uncovered and goes, and it was like, oh my gosh, I'm seeing your face. I thought that was very interesting.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say that's certainly a requirement of other cultures, whether or not you're a bride. It's never been a requirement of our culture, but it's a good segue to lead into the actual reasons for the that are given, classical reasons that are given. The Ramah actually says there are two, aside from the symbolic gesture of the chuppah that the veiling represents that we talked about, there are two other distinct purposes for the bride covering her face. One is for tznius, modesty, and I'm going to explain that in a minute. And the other has to do with the bride not seeing the ring. Okay, so very interesting. So let's talk about the tznius. Okay, so as we said, the Torah doesn't make wearing a veil a requirement of a woman. Okay, but in this context, it's kind of fitting. Now, it's not proper. We know that men are told it's not proper to look at a woman. Even looking at her clothing and jewelry is not appropriate, right? However, it is permitted for men to gaze at the dress and the jewelry of a bride at her wedding, in order, it says, to make the bride more beautiful and beloved to her husband. So we want to endear the couple together, so you can gaze at the dress. A man can gaze at the dress of a woman, the bride, and the jewelry, But it still would not be appropriate to stare at her face, right? So it's a moment where everybody is looking at. Imagine the chuppah, right? It's a moment where everyone is looking at the bride and groom. And at this moment, we don't want her to be stared at. She's being looked at. She's being stared at by everybody. All the hundreds of people are just looking at her. It's not appropriate for her.
I love that.
You love it?
Queen for a day.
Yes, absolutely.
Me too.
No, it's her moment to shine. It's her moment to shine. But we don't want her to be on display like that, so we cover her face. But it's also a related idea is that it's an act of elevating her. So, in other words, it expresses a certain dignity. Yeshayahu refers to the veil as a glory, a tiferet. Okay, and so what it does for the bride is it elevates her status. According to a commentary named Ibn Yarhi, I don't know who that is. I'm not familiar with that person before this. But he says the veil demonstrates that this is not a betrothal in the marketplace. That's his phrase, betrothal in the marketplace, which apparently was some sort of custom. I mean, they used to do it. It wasn't. In other words, the act of kiddushin marries a couple so that they need a get to separate. what is the act of kiddushin? You don't need a rabbi. You don't need anything. You take a ring. You take something. You say harayat mekudeshedli in the presence of two witnesses, and it's done. So it can be done anywhere. In fact, my father likes to tell a story that in his day he heard of, like, it happened once, like in a joking manner. He was in a mixed company with a girl, and he, in a joking way, he just did it, and they had to get a get. They had to.
My God.
So you have to be very careful of doing this. So apparently this could happen in the marketplace. A guy sees a girl that he likes, and he says, "Hey, you want to marry me? All right, let's do it." So here, and then they do it. Now this was, like I said, it's allowed, but it was frowned upon to the extent that if in the times of the Talmud, if it was known that this person did this, they would be flogged in the court of Rav. Okay, so that's what the Gemara says, that if it happened, they'd be flogged. It's not supposed to happen. It's not supposed to be that way, that you just, it's like a meat market. All right, I see you, I take you. That's it. That's not what a Jewish wedding is supposed to be, and a Jewish betrothal, right? So the veil is a way of saying this woman is a dignified woman. This is an elevated process, and it's not a marriage in the marketplace kind of idea. Now, related to this idea of elevation, we have another example of holy or kodesh objects being veiled. And specifically, I'm talking about the sanctified objects in the temple. All right, so the sanctified objects in the temple, like the vessels of the temple, they were called hekdesh. Kiddushin, kodesh, hekdesh, same root word. Hekdesh meaning sanctified or set aside, right? Holy. We know it, the word as holy. So they were, whenever they had to travel, in other words, whenever they had to go out of the temple, they had to first be covered, because their elevated status meant that we don't want people to just stare at them. You know, this is related to the idea of tznius that we talked about often, is that when something is special, you cover it up. You don't show it to the world. You do the opposite. You have a precious gem. You don't leave it on your dresser. You put it underneath, your stockings in a bag, in a felt bag to protect it. And, right? So there is the same idea that the bride being hekdesh or set aside, kadosh, right? She is like the sacred objects in the temple. It's a dignified way of presenting her. So even though she has to be presented in front of a large group of people, she's not going to be just stared at like as I said, like a meat, piece of meat in the marketplace. So that's the modesty issue of the veil. Okay. Now we get to the ring. All right. So what's up with this? Okay. So the Ramah says that another reason that we veil her is so she can't see the ring and she won't have any questions as to its value. What do you think that's about?
Say that again.
So she can't see the ring that's being put on her finger under the chuppah.
So she's put a veil goes over her.
Yeah. So she can't see the ring, and she won't have any questions as to its value. Why do you think that matters?
Well, it has to have a certain value to be legal. So
Close. You're getting close.
I don't want her to be thinking about, well, if you spend this much on that.
Right. So think legal. Think legal. Right. Legally, the legal process of acquiring the bride is it's a monetary transaction. He gives her something that has to have a specific value. It has to be of a certain value, right? It can't be, a penny. It has to be a certain value. If she thinks the bride has to agree to the approximate value of what she's getting, because she has to agree to the whole transaction. I'm going to marry you, but part of that legal transaction is you're giving me a ring worth so and so. If she sees the ring, and let's say he told her I'm spending $500 on the ring. And she sees the ring and she thinks, there's no way he spent $500 on this ring. If there could be a doubt in her mind as to the agreed upon value of the ring, there could be a real problem with her accepting this transaction. And legally, you're going to have a problem.
So literally, she's kind of in the dark.
She needs to be. Yeah. I just said, because she needs to agree to the value of the ring. We can't put any doubts in her mind. She hasn't seen the ring before. this. I don't think it's...
Yeah, but if she sees it, and she sees that he broke the legal transaction...
That she thought...
She needs to know that.
Well,
she agreed on a certain value for the ring, and now she sees...
No. It's not about the ring being a different value. We're assuming that the ring is going to be the value that she assumes it's going to be. In other words, every woman today, they get married and they think, okay, it's a plain gold band. It'll be about, I don't know, 200, 300, whatever the value of a gold, less, you know what I'm saying? You understand that there's a certain value in the gold. Let's say she gets a white gold ring and she thinks it's silver. Sterling is worth, what, $20, $30, could be? So if there's a doubt, I'm not saying that legally he can do a switcheroo with the value. I'm saying it's not ever stipulated exactly what the amount is going to be. I don't think in the ksuba it just says it has to be more than a pruta. That's all. A pruta, a certain coin value. So in the ksuba, in other words, the legal document only says it's going to be, the ring has to be over a certain amount of money, right? Oh. All right, but if there's doubt in her mind that the ring is worth less than she thought it would be, not that he said it would be.
The rabbi's going to confirm that it's at least a pruta or whatever.
Yeah,
right?
I think they look
nowadays to get any kind of ring.
Yeah, a pruta.
It's worth like a few dollars.
Yeah, it's really.
Well, you could use a Cracker Jack possibly.
Right, you could give anything. You could, right. It's really not a big deal. So it's not about him cheating her, and it's also not really about her saying I don't like my ring. It's really about putting a little seed of doubt in her mind. That's the problem. The problem is she has to accept this transaction with a full heart. And if there's a little doubt in her mind, like this isn't what I thought I was getting, wait a minute. So now there's doubt in her mind as to whether or not this is a good ring to use. Therefore, there's a possible problem with the whole transaction. She didn't accept it with a full heart. Yeah.
After the Kedushin, she looks at the ring. She can never look at the ring?
No, of course, no, just for the, no. After Kedushin, yeah.
She looks at the ring.
Right.
And she then has the doubt.
It's too late.
But
I don't think that's right. I mean, I don't think that's fair.
It's not good for Sean Bias.
I think, no, not at all, because now you've interjected something very negative into the marriage. Now she's doubting his honesty, and that's not good.
That's a potential problem, but it's not a potential legal problem at that point. That's the point.
But that's
it's not a potential legal problem. It may be another problem for the bride and groom, but it's not a potential. We're trying, the point that the Ramah is making is we're trying to avoid any legal problems. We're trying to avoid any legal problems. In other words, halachic problems. If she doesn't fully accept the marriage, the process of acquiring her.
Okay, so let's say the Kedushin, she finds out he's a ganav, and it's not worth it, then she can get a get.
Yeah, after the...
Would they give a get on that basis, that he's a ganav? Because that is a ganav. If he did this minimal, what is it, pruta?
Yeah.
He was supposed to spend and he didn't.
Well, no, it's not. It's not really exactly how it works. He doesn't tell her, "Look, I'm going to spend $500 on the ring." No one has. The bride doesn't have to know how much he spends. It's just that in her. That's the point. Is that in her mind, she's expecting a certain something. Let's say he's a rich guy, so she's expecting a diamond encrusted. I don't know if you can have diamonds on a wedding ring. Okay, she's expecting the highest 24 karat gold from him. Not because of anything he said, but because of something she's expecting.
So that's a different story.
Yeah, well, that's exactly the point.
I understood it differently.
Okay.
He had agreed to spend at least.
No. He doesn't have to tell her how much.
The pruta he does have to do.
He has to spend at least a pruta.
Well, okay.
But he doesn't. But that's a couple dollars.
That's like cents.
You can't buy a ring less than that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I didn't know what a. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's very little. It's not a problem. It's just it's something with which she's saying, this is it. This is your your dollar. But like sometimes people will make an acquisition, a legal acquisition, with only like a dollar bill. It's still legally binding, right? This is a legally binding thing. Of course, traditionally, we're going to give her something that is going to last a long time, that is going to represent how much he loves her, blah, 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 right? So it's only...
How to steal wedding band? That's worth a lot.
People do.
And hug women.
But like I said, in any event, it prevents the possibility of anything in her mind that could possibly prevent the legal transaction from being valid. Okay, that's what the Ramah says. Okay, and it's also a little bit of a symbolic gesture, where she's basically saying, I don't care about the value of the ring. She's trying to say, demonstrating she's entering into the marriage, even though it turns out to be less than she thought it was worth. I read some other very interesting and nice reasons on Chabad websites and such. One is that the groom is making a symbolic statement, and he's saying that, as beautiful as you are, I'm not marrying you for your skin-deep beauty. I'm not marrying you just because, on this day you're all for pits. You got the hair done and the makeup done and everything's perfect. But I couldn't care less about the physical, the superficial elements. I'm marrying you because of your deeper beauty, your underlying beauty that we can't see. And he's also saying, I recognize that you're a whole package. That even the beautiful personality that you have comes with some maybe not so beautiful personality elements that are underneath the nicer ones. And I'm marrying you for the whole thing. I don't care what I'm getting. I'm getting everything. Your beauty is just one aspect of who you are. But there's also a symbolic gesture that the bride is making with veiling, and she's saying, I am now setting myself aside for you, right? So I am now cutting myself off. In other words, my beauty, my physical beauty is unavailable to anyone else. I'm unapproachable now. I'm saving myself for my husband. It's all for him, right? Now, let's get back to Moshe. There's another reason I mentioned that Moshe... Oh, I didn't mention. I mentioned there was a third person. Right. Moshe. Did I say Moshe? Okay, Moshe Rabbeinu was the third person in the Torah that veils himself. And actually, I don't know if this is in the text or Medrash. Probably Medrash. Mm-hmm. Medrash. Yeah? What? I don't think it's in the text. No, it's not. It's Medrash. He's the third person that veils himself in the Torah. Again, this is Medrash, but... it says that when Moshe came down from Har Sinai after the Chet HaEgel, the sin of the golden calf, he had a holiness in his face. He had just been in the divine presence, and he had such a divinity in him that the holiness of the divine presence shone through his face, and his face was so bright that the people could not look at him, literally couldn't see his face. They had to look away, so that when he spoke to Bnei Yisrael, he had to veil his face so that they could hear what he was saying. Okay, now let's go to the bride and groom. The bride and groom, on the day of their wedding, they're also in an elevated divine state, right? Their union is a reenactment of the union between God and Bnei Yisrael, and because the metaphor of is used of a marriage to when Bnei Yisrael accepted the Torah. And so, like Moshe, right, the women in the desert did not partake of the golden calf sin. They didn't sin. So they're in an even higher elevated state than their groom. And so their veiling their face is making them like Moshe. They're basically so holy at this moment. And it goes back to the veiling of the holy objects, I suppose, also, that the divine presence is shining through her face, so she's like Moshe. The final reason that I saw was that we want to avert the evil eye. The evil eye is the ayin hara, is this harmful negative energy that can actually be in the air when people are looking at her in maybe a jealous way or a negative way at all. So we don't want people to look at her and create that harmful negative energy. So those are the reasons that I saw. I saw some interesting. Couple of interesting elements historically. Some people had the bride in some communities the bride was veiled in the morning, and stayed veiled the whole day. And in some other communities, and I don't know, this might have been one or two throughout history, but the groom was not present for the veiling. It was the rabbi who ceremoniously did it, but in most communities, the groom has to be there, as for the reasons that we discussed. Now, I mentioned at the very beginning that there is also some discussion as to whether or not the bride is allowed to be veiled, right? So this goes back to the Yaakov Rachel story, right? If now it's a little bit different. The reason that the rabbis they discuss is the bride allowed to be veiled? So what do you think would be the reason? Think legally again. Why would there be a legal possible problem with the bride being veiled for the wedding ceremony?
Because she might be the wrong bride.
He has any doubt when he's saying that.
Say again.
Right.
What did you say?
And it's similar to the bride being veiled for the ring reason. What if the groom has any doubt that it's the right bride?
That's an interesting idea, but that's not. We're not worried about his head. But what'd you say? If there's some doubt as to if it's her, right?
Yeah.
So. Huh? So under the chuppah, one of the things that takes place, if you carefully watch carefully, you'll see one of the things that happens is we have two witnesses that come under the chuppah, and they have to say, yes, we attest that this is this person and this is this person, and they're marrying, and that's right. There's actually two people and two witnesses. Now, let's say the witnesses don't see the bride because the bride is veiled. So the rabbis say, is this a possible problem with their testimony? Because how can they give testimony that this is who she says she is, or this is who the chassid says she is, if they can't see her face? So that's some bit of discussion between in the Gemara, and they practically rule that since everybody knows who the bride is supposed to be, we've seen her before the Bardekin, she's accompanied by her parents down the aisle, she's standing next to the chassan. There's really, it's almost a ludicrous idea that this is not the same woman that is meant to marry this man. So everybody understands that this is the right person. So therefore, the Edom do not have to actually see her face under the chuppah. Okay. So, but yeah, yes, Lisa.
So I have two questions.
Yeah.
The first is
I'm getting ready to write them down because I'm ready that I won't know the answers. Okay.
the thickness of the veil.
Oh, okay, so that's a good question. So, traditionally, there isn't, I don't think there's certainly no legal requirement as to how thick the veil has to be. It's custom only, right? The whole thing is customarily. It used to be maybe, like I said, legally binding as the chuppah part of Nisuin, and now it's not. Was it ever a matter of how thick it has to be? I don't know. Today, certainly not. Now, there are customs, and there are different customs. The Hasidic custom is it has to be what we call there's a it's called a challah cover. I think that's the term they use, the challah cover. They do it that way.
Maybe part of the answer, is about seeing the ring.
Well, even if you're veiled somewhat,
But yeah,
even a gauzy thing,
right.
it's enough, right? Yeah. Various people have various customs. Like I said, I was very adamant at my wedding that I would see what I don't want to miss my chuppah. So I made my own veil, and I made sure that it was see-through, that I could see at least.
Yes.
You didn't really see my face. It was like 2 or 3 layers, and it was gauzy, and I still have it. But, it's I made it myself. It was cool. But so with various, I think.
So it's just
Various minhagim. I don't think there's nothing set in stone about what it has to be. Because again, it's not a halachic thing. That in the second question.
So my second question is a little bit more loose. But so we've talked a lot about the idea of covering the face as the sanctity. Mm-hmm. But everything we've learned about modesty is your face isn't covered.
Right.
Your body's covered.
Right.
Your body's kind of the part that's sexualized.
Which is why I said that when we're talking about covering the bride's face, it's not, as we said, it's not Jewish law to cover a woman's face at all. Unlike Muslim countries where they cover the whole body head to toe. But again, on the issue of So we're making a distinction between two aspects of the covering the face with modesty. One is to protect the woman's modesty, and the second one is that we cover holy things, hekdesh, the sanctified objects. So the first element is more of we are saying this is a woman on this special day. She's being stared at by hundreds of people, and we want to protect a little bit of her dignity. We don't want her to be on display. We're not saying, look what he's getting. This is look, everybody stare at the bride. How beautiful is she? Even though, of course, she is.
Every part of what the bride, I mean,
Yeah.
there's so much.
Right. But exactly the point.
Beautiful gown. And
No, but
it's all
exactly the
about
point.
that.
But exactly the point
Yeah.
is that she is put on display. And again, as we said, according to the rabbis, you should give her that kavod, that honor. You should make her beloved to her husband.
Right.
She should be that gorgeous. This is her day to be gorgeous. But we're making we're putting a limit on that by saying just for the ceremony. For the chuppah ceremony, we're saying it's right that she should be not on display completely. That's what we're saying. Look at her dress. Look how at the beautiful pearl stitching, detailing. Look at all the crystals. But give her a little bit of modesty at this point. And then again, the other aspect of it is the veiling of something holy. So she's also this elevated creature at this point. She's and again, it's different from what we do every other day, where you can look at a woman and you can look at a woman's face, but we're not, to stare at a woman's face is not appropriate. And this is a time when we are going to be staring at her. So we want to give her that little modicum of privacy. Yeah, Barbara.
Where did the custom come? I don't think it's from at all. That you have to fast until the ceremony.
I don't know the source of that. I know it's probably. I don't know the source of it. I have to look into that. I have to look into the source of fasting on the day. They both do it though. Both the groom and the bride.
Yeah.
What do you think?
He discusses it. Rabbi Ari Kaplan discusses it in his book. I don't recall it now, but
Which book?
Made in Heaven.
You have it?
You have the Torah Center too.
Okay. So I don't want to give you an answer that could be wrong. So I don't know the source of that. I'll look into that. I'll find that. Yes, question.
Okay, so it seems to me, if I'm wrong, the veil is not a halachic requirement.
I would say no. Well, I don't know if I should say no. Is it halachic requirement? I can't believe I didn't find that answer.
Because some people were arguing that the bride shouldn't be covered.
Right. Well, there is a discussion as to that. Mm-hmm. There is a discussion in the Gemara among the rabbis. Mm-hmm. Is it right to cover the kala's face because this legal process has to include seeing or knowing that this is the bride. Mm-hmm. So therefore, does that mean that the veiling is not halacha? It's a good question. I'm going to have to look. I knew there were questions I wouldn't be able to answer. I want to say it's not. I want to say it's not halacha. What?
I mean, there's different levels.
They are going to still be married.
The legal status of the marriage doesn't mean you should do it.
No, right. No, I don't think it has the status of halacha. That would be my first instinct. But let me get back to you on that too. I'm not going to answer that question.
That we were told about it.
What?
I feel like it was halacha. There would have been details of how to do it properly.
Right.
Very open.
Right. That's true. That's true.
Suits a veil.
Yeah. No, I'm going to say that for all the reasons that I gave about the meaning and the doing it again. I did answer that question. I absolutely did answer that question. I said that in terms of chuppah, in other words, the nisuin, for the purposes of the set part of the ceremony called nisuin, it's not. It doesn't have any halachic validity. So I think I'm. What? You could still have, you saying you think it could still have halachic validity? No, I don't think it has. It's not a halachic thing. It's custom at this point. Yeah.
Okay, so then if it's custom,
But it's universal custom. Let's put it that way.
among Jews or non-Jews as well.
I don't know about non-Jews. I don't know any other
They always
cultures.
wear veils.
Well, you're saying like
They
the
also
Islamic
do
cultures,
veils.
their women are, in some of the communities, they're always veiled, and some not.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
I've never been to a non-Jewish wedding where the bride wasn't veiled. That doesn't mean, because I have a very small sample of a huge population of them.
Right.
But in the United States,
Right.
They don't often have it over their face.
no, but they have a veil.
They have like
Some kind of veil.
A decorative, but that's
Yeah.
really a decorative
Right.
thing.
Right. Yeah. No, not over the
Right.
face.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Can I just?
Yeah. Wait. Well, I think Alice wasn't quite done.
So yeah, so my thinking is, okay, if it's not halachic, then it's custom. So then people say, now we can't remember the origin of this custom. So let's look at various sources and let's look at various possibilities for this, the meaning of these customs. And you look at the three sources in the Torah that were, three people that were veiled, and they were veiled for three different reasons. So it could be for any one of those reasons. And the thing is, in the end, you don't really know why. You don't know where the custom comes from. You don't really know what it means. And you're just making guesses. And, I mean, that's not wrong or bad, but it's sort of ex post facto. The value in it is of an intellectual, spiritual exercise based on a premise that can't be proved, which is not necessarily bad, but it's pretty ethereal.
So I see it as a little bit less ethereal than you're describing, and the reason is because we have something. We have something called Masorah, right? Mm-hmm. Masorah means we have an unbroken chain of tradition. Mm-hmm. So that when, for example, when we read in the Gemara about veiling a bride for the purpose of nisuin, mm-hmm. right? I believe that happened, right? When Ramah says we do it for these reasons, also the reasons of modesty and the reasons of the ring issue, the unbroken chain of our tradition is, in a lot of ways, it's oral, right? Mm-hmm. And then it was written down in the form of the Mishnah and Gemara, and then of course we have the centuries and the millennia of the traditions. Mm-hmm. So if I know that we had a tradition of veiling the bride, it's in our present day, but it goes back and back and back, and I can see it, and I can see it traced.
The origin has been lost, or the original impetus has been lost.
Well, no, as I said, the original impetus was one of the ways that they accomplished the legal act of nisuin, of chuppah. That was one of the ways they did it, and it used to have halachic validity. You could say that because the bride's face was veiled, this accomplishes the legal act of nisuin. So it was at one point, and we have that as the record, that was at one point the reason. All this other discussion that I've been giving is other nice ideas and the sources from the Torah. Those are sort of corollary to the discussion, as it were. I thought there are interesting aspects of it to look at, but the original intent was a legal process. Now we don't have that. We did lose why we lost that halachic validity, why veiling lost that significance, I can't tell you. I don't know, and I don't know if anyone knows. I don't know. But at some point it lost that. It did lose that. But we retained the custom.
Right. And there are many ways of, as you said, duplicating.
Yes, right.
So,
but the Jewish people, whenever we have a custom that has, we have an expression that says minhag halacha dami. And it doesn't mean you're an idiot for thinking otherwise. It means that minhag, custom, is very much like halacha, which means it has the force of law. A custom that is in place for centuries has the force of law, meaning we can't just decide we're not doing it anymore, because it really has a basis, a foundation, a strong foundation. this is the way we've always done things, and therefore it's valid to do it. So the fact that we have such a strong custom and tradition, that we have an unbroken chain of doing this, right, means that, again, it's a custom that is, I feel it's much less, I wouldn't use the word ethereal to describe it, simply because we have this Masorah, this legacy, this unbroken chain of doing it for so many millennia.
Yeah, no, I hear your point, and it's a good point that you mentioned the legally binding aspects of the chuppah, and there are very varying ways of achieving that, and so the veil is one of them, and maybe it doesn't have the force of law right now, but that's because there are other things that have taken its place, like the canopy and the yichud.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah, thank you.
Okay, Barbara, you had a question?
Put a footnote on it. In many of the Lerman weddings now, you see the veil that you cannot see the bride's face. And
By the way, that doesn't mean that she can't see out.
exactly.
I'm just saying, it
Right.
could be that it's...
But it's probably a
Okay.
little limited. With
Yeah,
the veil.
sure.
And they feel,
Okay.
these brides, that this is a very spiritual time. They're saying whatever they're
Right,
saying.
right,
They don't want to be distracted
right.
by, I mean, I thought just the opposite myself, but
Yeah,
these are
yeah.
people that are a little deeper than me. And so they don't want to be distracted. They're fasting. They're like on Yom Kippur.
Right.
They're like the
Yes,
holiness of
right,
angels.
right,
And
right.
for them, the veil
Yeah.
helps in that.
Yeah,
kind
that's a
of
good
way.
point. That's a very good point, because you can get distracted by all the glitz and glamour around you at that moment.
Right.
And that, they say that under the chuppah, the bride has tremendous... Right, exactly. But they say that under the chuppah, the bride and groom both have tremendous power. They have tremendous conduit to the heavenly, the heavenly gates there. They can their tefillos, their prayers are incredibly powerful. And a lot of brides do take the time to say a little tehillim or to say other prayers. People give them names to say for, like, people that need refuah, people that need a recovery. So yes. So at this point, it's, if you want to really concentrate and use, as it were, that power that you've been given at this moment, then it would make sense that you want to not be able to be distracted by, ooh, look who's there in that row, and look how many people there are at my wedding, things like that. So that makes sense, yeah.
This is really good. What's our
was
topic
fun.
for next week?
I don't know yet.
Oh, boy.
I know. Let me just stop this. I would like to go back